Hey, Right on Con. I'm Holly Root with Waxman Level Literary, and I am here today in Los Angeles to talk to you about high concept. So it's one of those things that you hear a lot when you are out there in the trenches, trying to figure out how to break through the noise of the slush pile and sort of make your project stand out. You know, agents will say, "Oh, I'm really looking for high concept projects," or maybe you get passes that are like, "This is really good writing, but mostly I'm finding that I can sell high concept better than anything else." So you're sitting there in your home going, "What is high concept?" If you've Googled this phrase, you've probably found some really good information and some really terrible information. So I'm going to try to do my best to help sort that out for you and give you a little bit of clarity. All right, so the biggest thing about cracking this nut right now is that it's really going to pay off for you at every step of the process. It helps you start thinking about things not just from a writer's lens, but from an industry lens. And I think that's actually really empowering and can help decrease your frustration with the process, because I get it. Like, it's very hard to be out there wanting to tell your stories and sort of focusing on this very pure thing, and then that slams up against the reality that the way that we sell books and talk about books just advances certain kinds of projects naturally. So the more that you can kind of understand that, I think the more empowered you'll feel and the more confident you'll be. It'll also help you as you're sort of figuring out which projects to focus on, help you identify those really promising ideas early so that you're spending your time in the best possible places. So what high concept isn't, I think it's helpful sometimes because high concept is one of those know it when you see it kind of things. I think it's helpful to say what it's not. So a high concept is not the entirety of your novel. It's not a dumbed down, like, ridiculous lowest common denominator plot. It's not just a movie pitch, like sometimes you hear people do. It's Jaws meets Pitch Perfect, which is a movie that maybe, I don't know, I would like to see. And it's also not just another word for gimmicky. I think a lot of times, a lot of the stuff that's out there is screenwriting focused, and so it can be hard to know kind of like what's a pitch, what's just a way of talking about things, and what truly high concept means. So I like to think about high concept as having 5 aspects. The first of those is that it's a premise with a broad appeal. So a premise is not the same as a plot. The plot is what happens in your actual story. The premise is what your story is about. So ideally, this premise is going to be easily parsed. It's going to be something that when people hear it, they know what you're talking about. You don't have to do a lot of like backing up and explaining in order for them to understand what it is. And again, that little line of what it is not going to capture every single thing that is special about your story. It's just going to be the sort of top level what the story's about. I always tell people a great place to go to sort of see what I mean by premise is to actually look at the New York Times bestseller list. So they list a little like one-line slug about each book that makes the list. And sometimes they're sort of hilarious because the Times has a house style that is elevated. And so sometimes there are things like, teen girl and vampire find love. And the way they phrase it is just ridiculous, but it actually does distill down what that book is about. So ideally, this premise is immediately intriguing, and it's going to tap into things that a lot of readers are interested in. And that's, when I say that, I mean on an elemental level, not just a sort of like demographic or, like sometimes we get queries that are like, 32 million Americans will go sailing this year. And like that kind of stuff is not what I mean. I mean that it's something on a gut level that really grips us. We like stories with big emotions. We like stories with stakes. We like stories about conflict. So those kinds of things are more what I mean about reader interest than just necessarily specific subject matter. So another sort of interesting way to think about this, if you don't subscribe to Publishers Marketplace, I think it's worth doing at least for a month just to check out how book people talk about books. You can do the same thing by following the deal listings that Publishers Weekly puts out in their free newsletters for kidlit and then for adults. But you can kind of see how people inside the business talk about books. And when you start to read a lot of deal announcements, you really start to see which of the concepts are immediately appealing to you. So that's a great way to sort of hone in on how book people talk about concepts and explain them. So the second thing that this high concept should have is an ooh factor. Um, when somebody tells you about a book and you go, oh, that thing that makes you go, oh. So it's helpful to start interrogating for yourself what makes you go, oh, about a book when you hear it. Like, what kinds of stories do you respond to? When you're talking to friends about books and you recommend something, what are the ones that everybody goes, oh, that sounds great? Or like, ooh, I should pick that up. Start noticing that stuff, paying attention to those things. I often say that high concept is where originality and familiarity intersect. So it's got to be familiar enough to be intriguing, but original enough to feel fresh and exciting. The thing that makes you go, ooh, can be delivered in the execution or in the premise. So it could be, this is one reason that a lot of times like retellings or reimaginings feel high concept, because it gives us something familiar and then something unknown. It could be a trope that's been twisted, turned on its head, a chosen one story flipped inside out. That's something that, sometimes people talk about. It could be a mashup of two genres. It could be a structural thing. Sometimes people will take a story that might have been easier to do in a small or quiet way, but because it's told in 24 hours that changed their life, or the 1 week told backwards, or something like that, it gives it a little hook to make people go, oh, that's different from the story that I'm used to hearing. The third thing that I think is key for high concept is that you have a compelling emotional appeal in what you're doing. So sometimes where high concept gets a bad rap is people will say, oh, that's just derivative, lowest common denominator junk. But if you look at the things that really succeed in a really big way, they all connect with something deep down in people. There's a central humanity that really resonates. And so a lot of times when what people describe that as when they're talking about a high concept idea is stakes. But what are stakes really? Stakes are us caring about what happens. You can set up, and everyone will die. And if we don't care, then it doesn't really work as stakes. So it's less about creating these sort of artificial distinctions and more about hooking into what humans respond to in story. So you engage with the protagonist's plight, you connect to the characters. Oftentimes this emotional appeal piece is what elevates the truly high concept idea from like, oh, neat idea, into, oh my gosh, I can't put it down, I had to tell everyone I knew. And that's, of course, what we're going for. The fourth element of high concept, I think, is a standout setting. This is something that's very easy to sort of overlook when you're thinking about concept, because oftentimes your pitch is not necessarily going to distill the setting into the brew. But sometimes it is. Like sometimes a big deal about what the book is and why it is different and why it is fresh is the setting. Other times it's more of a subtle part of the story. If you think about like Hunger Games is one where the setting really matters. It's a huge part of what the concept is. In other books, it's maybe a little bit more on the back burner, but I think it is important enough to bring to your attention here, because sometimes that can be enough almost in and of itself to sort of elevate something to that high concept level. And then the last piece of this, to me, for high concept, is that it's a story that illuminates a universal humanity. It's things like tapping into, and these are all like, this is why I think high concept is so tricky, because you're taking very commercial ideas, connecting with lots of people, doing things that people think are just sort of intrinsically cool, that catch your eye, that stop you, that make you go, oh, all of those are commercial ideas. But then what makes a high concept really sing, what differentiates it from just sort of like a rock'em sock'em robots kind of thing, is whether you're able to say something with all of that. Whether there's a story that you want to tell there about truth or family relationships or what it means to, leave your world and find something new. Those are the things that really take the high concept and the cool setting and the big stakes and the emotional impact and then take them to the next level. If you really are able to cross over and transcend, that's when the high concept will really sing for you. So I hope that some of this has been helpful for you. You might be wondering, how do I actually go about getting one of these high concepts? And I think the biggest and best thing that you can do is to start looking for them everywhere you go. I think most people sort of naturally understand what this is. They just have a hard time maybe coming up with it in the stories that they're wanting to tell and identifying it in their own writing. So I think if you just start to have your antenna up about what catches your attention, what feels fresh and new and exciting and high concept, when you start to look around you in pop culture, in the books you read, in the TV shows you watch, I actually think that's a great way to do it. What's the last TV show you started watching regularly? Why did you start watching it? You know, what about the concept? How would you pitch it in one line? I think you can also practice doing this in talking about other people's books. So if you look at books that have been successful, a lot of times you can see that they are these really easy books to pitch. They're things that you know, when your friend says, "Oh, what are you reading?" You can say, you know, "Oh, it's da 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 da," and there you go. And you've got like a very easy, concise way to tell somebody, and your friend goes, "Oh yes, that sounds great." So that's the trick that you kind of have to learn, is to just honestly talk about these things in concept terms more often. And as you do that, you'll see that your fluency goes up, and your brain just sort of starts to see stories in that concept way. So yeah, increasing your fluency for those, reading smart, really seeking out books that people talk about a lot. You might do a little dive through, okay, well, this is working, so why? What are the big books that are working? What are the concepts that people are responding to? What gets people's attention? What are the easy books to pitch and position and sell? So like if you go into a bookstore and you see something on an end cap, that's a book that everybody from the author, the agent, the editor, the publisher, the sales force, the marketing people were able to successfully take this concept along the line until the point that it came to you, the consumer in the store. So since that worked, take a look at that book, pick it up, read the copy. How do they talk about it? What's their hook to get you to pick it up and take it to the cash register? It's really as much about learning to speak another language. Oftentimes for writers, I find that most of the time people who say, "Oh, I'm no good at high concept," often are not actually bad at high concept. They just don't know what lens they need to be looking through. So one of the things that I encourage people to do is to take a minute, give themselves like, let's say 2 minutes on a timer. You can do it right now with your phone or your computer. Give yourself 2 minutes on a timer and make yourself write down 6 concepts. The whole point here is that you have to do them fast, and you can't overthink them, and you can't make it out to be too big of a thing. The idea is really just to get your brain going on character, setting, conflict, stakes, emotional impact, those ideas from what a high concept is, and see if there's any fruit that bears out there. You know, do it every day until you kind of start to get a feel for how you would write down a high concept idea. And again, maybe none of them ever work out for you. Maybe there's nothing there, but maybe on day 3 you write something down and you're like, huh. And on day 4 you come back and you do your thing and you're like, yeah, that one from day 3 is still a thing. And in that case, congratulations, you have just found your high concept. Once you sit down and write it, that's a whole other set of challenges. But I hope that when you do, you will think to query me and that you'll have a great time with the rest of Write On Con. Thanks so much.